Welcome back to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a scholarly review of a truly fascinating historical paradigm shift. For generations, the mortal world was treated as nothing more than a stage for the 72 demons, basically just a place for them to harvest power, forge dark bargains, and wage their endless war of crowns. But what we're analyzing today is that exact pivotal moment in history when the mortal world stopped being prey and finally stood up to challenge the demonic hierarchy. And here's the kicker. It didn't happen with some massive magical army. As we'll see, it happened through the sudden emergence of three distinct, entirely unexpected powers. Okay, let's set up our historical syllabus for this review. We're going to map out the taxonomy of the three unique powers that literally forced the demonic hierarchy to step back and reconsider the mortal world. As you can see here, we'll be breaking down natural power, holy power, and raw human power. Now, these weren't traditional weapons in the way we usually think of them. They were core manifestations of defiance that completely upended the traditional rules of how high-ranking demons operated. So here is our agenda for today's review. We'll start with the awakening mortal world, then move into defining the three powers. After that, we'll examine Mar's internal conflict, track the rise of the mortal circle, witness the clash of the causeway, and finally discuss the burden of freedom. All right, let's get right into it with Section 1, the awakening mortal world, when prey becomes participant. Moving on to Section 2, defining the three powers, the Trinity of Defiance. First up, we have to clearly define natural power. And what's historically fascinating here is how this force acts as a complete contrast to demonic vanity. Think about it. Demons are absolutely obsessed with titles, ranks, and owning things, right? Natural power, on the other hand, doesn't boast, it doesn't threaten, and it certainly doesn't demand worship. It acts purely as a fundamental force of balance. When harm becomes a recurring rhythm, nature simply steps in and breaks that rhythm to correct the imbalance. And it does all of this without ever once pausing to ask who holds the highest demonic title. It just entirely rejects the concept of ownership. We can see this play out perfectly in the symbolic role of the old forest of Nerath Vale. Human lords, who were backed by lesser demons, marched right in with iron posts, black banners, and all their scribes to permanently record debts of ownership over the land. They fully expected the trees to just bend to their will. But instead, the forest simply erased every mark. The symbols that were carved into the bark healed up just like wounds. Roots casually lifted the demon-contracted roads right out of the soil and let the moss reclaim them. The forest didn't attack in some fiery rage. It just fundamentally refused to be owned. Now, contrast that with our second force, holy power. Whereas natural power rejects ownership, holy power's primary historical function is to ruthlessly expose hidden lies and demonic manipulation. It naturally enters those quiet places where humans have finally stopped bargaining, like a crumbling monastery with cracked bells, or a room where survivors are mourning without seeking any revenge. It doesn't arrive like a weapon of flame, but more like a scale-weighing truth. It makes pride sound incredibly childish, and literally forces falsehoods to become unbearable, dragging hidden truths right out into the open. A brilliant example of this is the symbolic role of the Bell of Witness in the city of Kaldor. So, beneath this grand marble negotiation hall, low-ranked demons had secretly buried agreements to manipulate human officials. But when the high religious humans finally ring the Bell of Witness, they actually weren't trying to magically banish the demons at all. They were just asking for the truth. And the sound of that bell didn't shatter the glass windows, it shattered the secrecy. Hidden promises literally crawled out of the ink, and unseen treaties physically appeared like breath on the walls. For demons who relied entirely on manipulation, this sudden exposure was way more terrifying than any physical fire. And finally, we have the third and perhaps the most surprising force, raw human power. This was completely non-magical. It was just the severe wisdom and faithful courage to simply say no and refuse compliance. The demons were incredibly frustrated by this because, unlike magic, this raw refusal couldn't be harvested or manipulated. This power is perfectly embodied by the historical account of the trembling messenger who stood before Baal, the first king. This messenger was visibly shaking with terror. Literally, the scroll was rattling in his hand, but he flat out refused to kneel. He was terrified, but he still said no. That faithful refusal, that is raw human power. Which brings us to Section 3, Island Mar's internal conflict, the reluctant mediator. Now, as a historian, this is where things get really deep. Our central figure, Island Mar, actually carried two competing demonic influences inside himself. On one hand, you had the fiery ember of Belial, constantly pushing him toward pride and command. But on the other hand, you had the quiet shadow of Vassago, urging deep understanding and restraint. And notice the incredible parallel here on the slide. Aelian's intimate internal battle perfectly mirrors the macro-level political disagreements happening at the exact same time among the demonic high crowns. Just as Aelian fought his inner urge for command, you had Baal demanding pressure and dominance, while Paimon and Vassago were advising observation and restraint. The macro and the micro were reflecting each other perfectly. But this internal duality brought some profound ethical risks for Aelian regarding his own pride. This all came to a head during a test by the holy witnesses in the Chapel of Unadorned Light. They looked at him and asked what he wanted most. And guys, he didn't say peace. He didn't say justice or survival. He confessed that his greatest desire was, quote, to be necessary. Wow. That startling confession revealed the profound danger of a leader who might unconsciously preserve a conflict just to maintain his own importance and satisfy Belial's ember of pride. He left that chapel with a lot less pride and a very healthy dose of fear regarding his own motivations. Let's look at what grew out of that in Section 4, Rise of the Mortal Circle, the Uncult. So, despite his internal struggles, Aelian became the focal point for this grassroots movement. And focusing on the lived experiences of these common people joining the mortal circle is vital to understanding the era. They weren't powerful mages or elite warriors. They were farmers, scribes, healers, deserters, and even children. Their shared uniting experience was that every single human institution had either lied to them or cowardly feared the truth. They were everyday survivors of corrupted systems, coming together to form a non-ritualistic system of accountability based purely on unwavering mutual agreement and rigorous discernment rather than magical dependency. Because of his own fears about pride, Aelian was incredibly strict about how this movement functioned. He explicitly forbade the building of any altars to himself. He prohibited any worship of the demonic ember he carried. And he completely banned his followers from drawing summoning circles or calling on unseen servants. Why? Because Aelian analyzed the situation and knew that avoiding rituals was literally the only way to stop humanity from simply replacing demonic chains with new chains of their own making. If they started building altars to him, they'd just be trading one master for another. This takes us to Section 5. Clash at the Causeway, the powers unite. Let's look at the timeline of the Black Causeway to see the exact historical moment where all three of these abstract powers physically intersected on the battlefield. The causeway was a road built over sacred graves by corrupt officials. Moment 1. A coalition of low-ranked demons tries to defend it by summoning terrifying illusions of famine and invasion. Moment 2. Guided by Aelian asking, who benefits from your terror? Raw human power simply refuses to obey the panic. Moment 3. Holy witnesses ring their bells, exposing the dark bargains literally buried beneath the road. And finally, Moment 4. Natural forest roots rise up and shatter the stone foundation. The demons fled because, for the very first time, natural, holy, and raw human power had answered together. Which leads us to the aftermath in Section 6, the burden of freedom, a covenant without chains. The victory at the causeway wasn't the end. It was really just the beginning of a new ethical framework. Ilian Mar outlined these teachings to his followers, identifying 4 distinct burdens of maintaining human freedom. You have to remember clearly, speak carefully, and absolutely refuse bargains that require the surrender of another soul. But the culmination of this is the 4th burden, the vital understanding that maintaining human freedom is a heavy, continuous practice. It's not just a single victory that you win and then forget about. It's the ongoing daily responsibility to not fall back into dependency. And nature itself powerfully reinforced this teaching of humility. You see, some of Ilian's followers foolishly hoped that the forests and rivers would basically become their new magical army to just wipe out the demons. But natural power utterly disappointed anyone who wanted revenge. The rivers just washed the blood from the stones without ever asking if it was human or demon blood. Nature refused to become a human weapon of war, and in doing so, it challenged humanity's ambition and pride, just as severely as it challenged demonic rule. This whole remarkable era culminated at the edge of Nerath Vale, where the survivors established the covenant without chains. They formalized the strict disciplines required to survive in a world with these competing powers. Just look at these tenets for a second. No miracle shall be accepted without witness. No fear shall be obeyed before it is questioned. And no leader shall be trusted merely because power stands behind him. It was a brilliant, grounded framework designed specifically to keep humans accountable to each other. So, what was the ultimate result? Well, the 72 demons were not destroyed. But as they left their councils, every single high crown carried a deep, lingering dread. Their absolute authority was permanently fractured. The mortal world had finally spoken in its own voice, and the demons realized a terrifying truth. If the mortal world could wake once, it could wake again. As we wrap up this explainer, we are left looking at the ultimate historical question posed by Ilian Mar's legacy. Now that humanity has found the power to resist the demonic crown by combining nature, truth, and sheer raw courage, can they actually carry that heavy burden of freedom long term? Or, given enough time, will they succumb to the temptation to conquer and simply become the very tyrants they replaced? It's a massive question, and one that really forces us to look not just at history, but at the nature of power itself. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.